The problem with teaching an alpha king how to be charming is that eventually he might get good at it. And he might practice on you. This was the catastrophic flaw in Aurora Casey's otherwise immaculate life plan. Her plan, until last Tuesday, had involved color-coded binders, a thriving etiquette coaching business for the socially hopeless elite, and a strict policy of never, ever getting involved. Now her plan involved standing in a room with the most powerful werewolf on the continent, teaching him how to say nice things to women, and pretending that his undivided attention wasn't slowly dismantling her entire nervous system. The man's smile could curdle milk. His attempts at small talk had once been classified by his own beta as a geopolitical incident. King Zev Wildblood was her student, and she, in a spectacular failure of professional detachment, was beginning to wish he'd flunk out. Aurora stood beside the grand hearth in the king's private study, a room so large it had its own weather system. A faint, nervous draft circled her ankles. Her spine was a steel rod of propriety. Across the expanse of priceless rug, King Zev was wrestling with a compliment. It was not going well. He stared at a vase of funereal-looking lilies as if it had personally wronged him. His brow was furrowed in the same way it probably was when negotiating treaties or declaring war. He was a man of immense physical presence, broad-shouldered and radiating a low hum of power that made the air feel thick. Yet faced with the task of saying something nice about flowers, he looked like a man trying to solve a complex equation with a fish. "The flowers," he began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Aurora's teeth. He cleared his throat. "They are fulfilling their function as decorative flora." Aurora squeezed the bridge of her nose. "Your Majesty, the goal is to charm a potential mate, not to conduct a botanical performance review." His head snapped toward her, his silver eyes, the color of a winter sky just before a blizzard, filled with genuine confusion. "But it is an accurate statement. Accuracy is not the point. Emotion is the point. Try again. What do they make you feel?" Zev considered this. He looked back at the lilies. His wolf, a voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like a drill sergeant dictating a memo, offered its input. Assessment: plant life, non-threatening. Scent profile, cloying. Tactical value, 0. Suggest we move to meat-based topics. Zev ignored him. "They make me feel nothing. They are plants. If I were a bee, perhaps I would have an opinion. I am not." Aurora took a deep, steadying breath. This was her job. She was good at her job. She was an omega who had built a career on teaching alphas how to behave, which was the ultimate irony. Most of her clients came to her through discreet referrals from desperate betas and panicking counsels. She was the invisible hand behind a dozen successful courtships, the woman who taught powerful men how to be seen while ensuring she never was. It was, if she was being honest with herself, the safest possible arrangement. You couldn't be hurt by something that didn't know you existed. Her wolf, whom she had privately called the Margin since she was 15, added a quiet annotation to this thought. See previous note, draft 7, on the difference between safe and numb. Author has been confusing the two since approximately age 12. Correction remains pending. The Margin was not like other wolves. Most wolves spoke in instinct and impulse. The Margin spoke in footnotes. It annotated Aurora's internal monologue with the calm, precise persistence of an editor who had been reviewing the same flawed manuscript for 26 years. Aurora's grandmother had been an editor of etiquette manuals, a woman who lived in red ink and margin notes, and who had taught Aurora that correction was a form of love. When Aurora's wolf needed a voice she couldn't simply ignore, it chose that one. The red ink. The editorial annotation that said, "I see what you wrote, and I see what you meant, and they are not the same thing." You could argue with a feeling. You could not argue with a well-sourced footnote. "Let's pivot," Aurora said, her voice unnaturally bright. "Forget the flowers. Let's return to Lesson 3, the art of the personal compliment. Find something you appreciate about me and articulate it." He turned his full attention to her. It was like being pinned by a searchlight. The low hum of his alpha presence intensified, and the fine hairs on her arms stood at attention. This was the part of the lesson she was beginning to dread. His gaze was so direct, so unblinking, it felt like he was performing a spiritual audit. He catalogued her, from the ridiculously sensible bun she twisted her hair into each morning, to the worn leather of her practical shoes. "This is fine," Aurora told herself firmly. "This is a clinical exercise. I feel nothing." The margin, citation needed. See goosebumps, left forearm. See also the fact that you chose the blouse with the good neckline today. Recommend the author stop lying in her own manuscript. Subject, Aurora Casey. Status, mate. Scent profile, rain, old books, and correct. Correction, perfect. Observation, she is holding her breath. Respiration rate is elevated. Pupil dilation noted. Hypothesis, our proximity is having the desired biological effect. Zev's jaw tightened. His wolf was a terrible co-pilot for social interaction. "Your posture," he said finally, "is structurally sound." Aurora's shoulders slumped. "We're trying to inspire romance, Your Majesty, not approve a building permit." "It is a sign of discipline and self-respect," he argued, a flicker of frustration in his eyes. "That is admirable." "It's a compliment for a soldier, not a potential queen." She paused, then added, more gently, "And if you ever say that to a woman at the gala, she will assume you are an architect with a very narrow specialty. Try again. Softer. More personal." She hesitated, her heart beginning a frantic tap dance against her ribs. "Try my hair. Hair is usually a safe starting point." He studied her bun with the intensity of a man examining a battlefield map. "Your hair is efficiently contained." "It's a bun, Your Majesty, not a prisoner of war." "I meant it as praise. Loose hair is a tactical liability. Yours is securely fastened. It shows forethought." Aurora pinched the bridge of her nose again. At this rate, she was going to leave a permanent mark. "Let's try a different approach. Forget specifics. Just try saying something warm, something that would make a woman feel appreciated." Zev straightened. He seemed to gather himself, the way he might before addressing a war council. "You are a competent professional, and your organizational systems inspire confidence." "That's a performance review, not a compliment." "It was sincere." "I don't doubt it, but sincerity without warmth is just a performance review with feelings. We need to find the overlap between what you genuinely think and what a normal person would want to hear." She took a breath. Last attempt. Eyes. Eyes are always a safe bet. Find something you notice about my eyes and say it. He focused on her eyes. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible thing in the room. He leaned forward slightly, his own silver gaze intense and analytical. For a terrifying moment, she thought he was going to try to measure the distance between her pupils. "Your eyes," he said, the words slow and deliberate, as if he were tasting them first, "are adequate." Aurora blinked. Once, twice. The word landed in the space between them with the grace of a dropped anvil. Adequate. Her eyes, which her mother had always called her best feature, were adequate. A slow, hot flush crept up her neck. This was fine. This was a teaching moment. She was a professional. For the record, the flush currently ascending the author's neck is not professional. It is personal. It is also spreading to the ears. This has been noted for the file. "Adequate," she repeated, her voice a marvel of calm. "An interesting choice. It suggests functionality, serviceability, like a sturdy bridge or a well-made pair of boots." A flicker of something, panic, crossed his face. "Is that incorrect? If you are attempting to woo a bridge, you are on the right track. If it is a woman, you have failed spectacularly." She held up a hand, palm out. The word you are looking for is beautiful. But that would be a subjective assessment, not an objective fact, he countered, as if she had just asked him to violate the laws of physics. How can I state it as truth? You state it as your truth, she explained, pacing a short, agitated line. You are not writing a scientific paper, Your Majesty. You are expressing a personal feeling. You look at her, you feel that she is beautiful, and you say the word. She stopped pacing. Now, try it. Look at me. He did. His gaze locked on hers, and the analytical coldness was gone, replaced by a focused intensity that made the air thin. The room, the fire, the nervous draft, it all fell away. There was only the unnerving, undivided attention of the Alpha King. Beautiful, he said. The word wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was low, certain, and utterly convincing. It landed not like an anvil, but like a spark, igniting a treacherous warmth deep in her chest. It was entirely too effective. He said it like it was an undeniable fact, a truth he had just discovered and was now announcing to the universe with the same casual authority he used to sign treaties. Her breath hitched. Her carefully constructed professional composure began to crack. The margin, for once, did not annotate. It simply underlined the moment and wrote, in very small letters, "Told you." Target acquired, his wolf noted with grim satisfaction. Phase 1 complete. Zev watched the wash of color on her cheeks, the slight parting of her lips. His wolf was right. The word had an effect. A significant, observable effect. He felt a strange, proprietary satisfaction that had nothing to do with passing a lesson. He had made her react. He had, for a single moment, breached the fortress of her perfect composure. And he found, to his great surprise, that he wanted to do it again. Aurora cleared her throat, shuffled her notes, and launched into a rapid lecture on the history of courtship gestures in the northern packs that she was almost certainly making up on the spot. He let her, but he didn't stop watching. And she, despite every instinct screaming at her to look away, kept catching herself glancing back. She went home that evening and reorganized her lesson plans. Twice. Then she reorganized her spice rack. Then she sat on her kitchen floor and stared at the wall for 11 minutes. The margin. The author would like the record to show that Lesson 3 was a success. The student produced the desired word. The lesson is complete. The author may now move on. The margin would like the record to show that the author has not moved on. The author is sitting on linoleum, thinking about the way he said beautiful like it was a geographical fact, like it was north, like it was gravity. The margin recommends the author get off the floor. The margin's recommendation is ignored. She did get off the floor. Eventually. She made tea, reviewed her curriculum binder, and told herself that Lesson 3 was an isolated incident. A fluke. The word had landed because he had delivered it with conviction, and conviction was simply a skill she had been training him to develop. It was evidence of her teaching ability, not of any personal significance. She was pleased. She was professional. She was fine. She went to bed and did not dream about silver eyes. The margin. Citation needed. Lesson 4 was dining conversation. Aurora had set up a practice table in the study, complete with 3 different fork sizes, 2 water glasses, and a centerpiece that Zev regarded with deep suspicion. The goal was to sustain a charming conversation across a formal dinner setting without resorting to military terminology, trade statistics, or prolonged silence. The key to dinner conversation, Aurora began, arranging place settings with the precision of a surgeon, is curiosity. You ask questions. You listen to the answers. You build on what the other person says. You do not interrogate them about their pack's strategic mineral reserves. That happened once, Zev said. It happened at a state dinner, Your Majesty. The Duchess of Highcrest thought you were threatening an audit. I was interested in her iron deposits. It was a compliment. It was not received as one. She sat across from him and folded her hands. Let's practice. I am your dinner companion. I have just told you about my recent holiday to the coastal territories. Respond. Did you enjoy the tactical advantages of the coastline? No. Start again. And remember the rules. Ask something personal. Show interest in feelings, not fortifications. He paused, recalibrated, and tried again. What was your favorite part of the trip? Good. That's good. Now I'll answer, and you respond to what I say, not to what you wish I'd said. She smiled, slipping into the role. My favorite part was the morning markets. They had these beautiful hand-painted lanterns. I bought 3. Why 3? 1 for my apartment, 1 for my office, and 1 because it had this blue glaze that reminded me of somewhere. I can't remember where. He looked at her with that unnerving focus. The lake near the southern border. There's a stretch of water that turns that exact color at dawn. I have seen it during training exercises. She blinked. That was not the response she had prepared for. It was specific, personal, and deeply observant. It suggested he was not just listening to her words, but connecting them to his own experience. It was, annoyingly, perfect. That's actually very good, she said, momentarily thrown out of instructor mode. I was not trying to be good, he said. You mentioned a color. I knew where I had seen it. I do not understand why that is a skill that requires teaching. Because with anyone else, it wouldn't be, she thought. It's only a problem when you do it with me. The author has just admitted, internally, that the student's attention is a problem only because it is directed at her. This is a significant development. The margin has highlighted it, underlined it, and added a flag for future reference. The author will pretend she did not think it. The margin will not pretend. The lesson continued. He asked her about her favorite book, her worst client, whether she preferred tea or coffee. Each question was blunt, unpolished, and entirely sincere. He did not perform curiosity. He was simply curious. About her. And with each answer she gave, she felt the invisible thread between them pull a little tighter. She ended the lesson on time, packed her things efficiently, and did not think about the lake at dawn. She thought about it all the way home. Lesson 5 was body language. This was supposed to be safe territory, clinical, academic. There was a handout. The problem was that Zev was a wolf. Wolves read body language the way most people read road signs, and when Aurora asked him to read hers, he did so with a precision that made her feel like she was standing under a medical scanner. Your feet are angled toward the door, he observed. But your shoulders are squared to me. You want to leave, but you are choosing not to. Your breathing has been slightly elevated since I entered the room. It was not elevated before I arrived. I checked. Aurora stared at him. You checked my breathing rate before you entered the room? I listened from the corridor. Your resting respiration rate is 12 breaths per minute. It is currently 16. The margin. The author's breathing rate is now 18. The margin declines to comment on why. This lesson is about you learning to read other people, Your Majesty, not about demonstrating that you can already read me like a surveillance report. You said to practice on available subjects. You are the available subject. I am beginning to regret that instruction. Lesson 6 was the art of the thoughtful gift. Aurora laid out the principles with brisk efficiency. A good gift shows attention. It tells the recipient that you see them, specifically, as an individual. Generic gifts, flowers, jewelry, chocolates, these say, I know you are a woman. A thoughtful gift says, I know you are this woman. Give me an example, Zev said. Hypothetical. Your dinner companion mentioned she collects antique maps. A thoughtful gift would be a rare map of her home territory, perhaps framed. It shows you listened, you remembered, and you went to effort. He nodded. And if the person mentioned that their favorite book was Pemberton's Guide to Formal Address, 7th edition, and that their grandmother's copy had a damaged binding that they had been meaning to repair but could not find a bookbinder skilled enough for the era of leatherwork? Aurora went very still. She had mentioned that, once, in passing, during Lesson 2, while explaining the historical origins of the formal bow. It had been a throwaway anecdote, a personal detail that slipped out between curriculum points. She had not thought he was listening. He had been staring at the ceiling at the time. That would be a very specific hypothetical, she said carefully. I have located a bookbinder, he said, in the northern reaches. She specializes in pre-industrial binding techniques. She has availability next month. The margin. The author is experiencing a cardiac event. This is not a drill. He remembered the book. He remembered the binding. He found a specialist. The margin would like to formally revise its earlier assessment. This is no longer a professional challenge. This is a 5-alarm emergency. That's very good technique, Aurora managed. Excellent application of the principle. You should use that kind of attentiveness at the gala. She did not say, "Don't use it on me. Please don't use it on me. I cannot survive you paying this much attention." She held it together for the rest of the lesson. She smiled, she corrected, she made a note in her binder about his excellent application of gift theory. She was a professional. She was fine. She made it to the corridor outside the study before she stopped walking. She leaned against the stone wall, pressing her back flat against it, and closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something worse. No one had ever remembered something she'd said in passing. No one had ever listened to a throwaway detail about a damaged bookbinding and then gone out and found a specialist in pre-industrial leatherwork in the northern reaches. No one had ever paid that kind of attention to her because she had spent her entire life making sure she wasn't worth paying attention to. And now someone was, and it hurt. Not because it was unwelcome, but because it showed her, with brutal clarity, exactly what she had been living without. The shape of the absence. The size of the thing she had trained herself not to need. The margin did not annotate. It did not correct or flag or cross-reference. It sat with her in the corridor, in the silence, and said nothing at all. Some things did not require editorial commentary. Some things just needed to be felt. After a while, she stood up, straightened her blouse, and walked home. She did not cry, but it was a near thing. Lesson 7 was the waltz. Aurora had debated canceling it. She had spent 30 minutes composing a memo about how dance instruction was outside the scope of her contract, before realizing that she had specifically included it in Module 4, and there was no credible way to deny this. Her own thoroughness had betrayed her. The study had been cleared of furniture, the rug rolled back to expose the wooden floor. A gramophone in the corner played a slow, formal waltz. Zev stood in the center of the room, looking as if he had been asked to defuse a bomb while wearing oven mitts. "It's not combat," Aurora said, approaching him. "You don't need to look like you're bracing for impact." "The last time I danced was at the Thornwick Summit. I stepped on the ambassador's foot so badly she required medical attention." "You fractured her toe?" "She had small feet. I had formal boots. It was a structural incompatibility." "That's the first time I've heard a broken toe described as an engineering failure." She took a breath and extended her hand. "Right hand on my waist, left hand holds mine. And for the love of all that is sacred, watch my feet." He placed his hand on her waist. It was, objectively, a standard dance hold. Millions of people had performed this exact gesture across centuries of formal events. There was nothing remarkable about it, except that his hand was warm and enormous, and it spanned nearly the entire width of her waist, and she could feel the restrained power in his fingers, the careful gentleness of a man who could bend steel, choosing to hold something fragile. The margin. The author's internal temperature has increased by what feels like several degrees. The margin would like to note that the author's left hand, currently resting on his shoulder, has gripped the fabric of his shirt. This is not part of the standard hold. The author is holding on. "Now," she said, and her voice was steady, which was a miracle of human willpower. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Follow my lead first, then we'll switch. He followed. Badly. His sense of rhythm was atrocious, his footwork a series of minor disasters, and he counted the beats under his breath like a man reciting a prayer he didn't believe in. But he was trying. He was trying with the same ferocious determination he brought to everything, and the sincerity of it, the sight of the most powerful man on the continent counting to 3 with furrowed concentration, was so endearing it made her chest ache. "Relax your shoulders," she murmured. "You're leading with tension. A waltz should feel like a conversation, not an interrogation." "I do not know how to have a conversation that does not feel like an interrogation. You have mentioned this." She laughed despite herself, and for a moment the tension broke. He looked down at her, surprised by the sound, and something shifted in his expression, something warm and unguarded and dangerous. "There," he said quietly. "That. You should do that more." "What?" "Laugh. When you laugh, you stop holding your face in that way you hold it, the professional way. You look—" He trailed off, apparently remembering the last time he had attempted to describe how she looked. "If you say adequate, I will step on your foot deliberately," she warned. "I was not going to say adequate." "What were you going to say?" He was quiet for a long moment. They were still moving, the waltz carrying them in slow circles around the empty room, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not catalog in any of her binders. "I was going to say, you look like you forgot to be afraid of me." The music played. They danced. She did not correct his footwork again. They moved in silence, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was full, warm, occupied. The kind of silence that happens between two people who are both thinking the same thing, and neither is willing to say it. She ended the lesson 10 minutes early. "Schedule adjustments," she said. He did not argue, but when his hand left her waist, she felt the absence of it like a change in temperature. The margin. We are in trouble. Lessons 8 and 9 blurred together. Each one pushed the boundary further, each one left her more exposed. But it was lesson 9 that nearly broke her. She taught him the art of the handwritten note. He was to compose a practice letter expressing romantic interest, using principles from their earlier lessons: specificity, sincerity, vulnerability. She expected a stilted formal document. What she received was 2 paragraphs in his blunt, unpolished handwriting that began, "I am told I should practice expressing admiration for a hypothetical person. I find I cannot make her hypothetical. She has brown eyes and she organizes things when she is frightened. And she taught me the word beautiful and ruined it for every other context." She read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully, put it in her binder, and told him it was adequate. He looked at her. She looked at him. They both knew what that word meant now. He almost smiled. She almost did, too. The margin. The letter is in the binder. The author filed it under Student Work Samples. It is not a work sample. The margin has flagged this misclassification, but expects no correction. Later that week, as she was packing up her binders after lesson 9, she made the mistake of stopping to examine the ornate carvings on the blood oak throne that dominated the hall outside the study. It was impossible to ignore, really. The thing was massive, ancient, and radiated a low, sentient awareness that prickled against her skin like static. She had passed it every day for weeks and never quite gotten used to it. "It rejected a queen once, you know," said a voice behind her. She turned to find Greta, one of the elder serving women, polishing a candelabra with the serene efficiency of someone who had been maintaining this castle since before Aurora's grandparents were born. Queen Iselda, consort to King Aldrich III. Story goes she married him for political alliance, no true bond between them. First time she sat on the throne beside him at a formal audience, the wood groaned so loud the whole court heard it. She never sat there again. Greta shrugged, buffing a stubborn spot. Course, some say it's all folklore, but the throne's still here and the story's still told. Even the furniture judges you in this castle, dear. Aurora looked at the throne. Its dark surface gleamed faintly in the firelight, ancient and watchful. Lovely, she murmured. That's very comforting. Wasn't meant to be, Greta said cheerfully, and shuffled away with her candelabra. Lesson 10 was supposed to be a practice dinner. Finian had been conscripted as a stand-in dining companion so that Zev could observe proper conversation technique from across the table before attempting it himself. Finian, who had not signed up for this when he accepted the position of Royal Beta, sat across from Aurora in the study's makeshift dining setup with the strained expression of a man who had been voluntold for a mission he did not understand. So, Finian said, unfolding his napkin with exaggerated care, tell me about your interests. Very good, Aurora said. Natural, open-ended. Now remember to maintain eye contact and lean forward slightly to show engagement. Finian leaned forward. Do you come here often? That's a bar in the low districts, not a formal dinner. Try again. Zev was supposed to be watching Finian. He was supposed to be taking notes on the beta's technique, noting what worked, what fell flat, how Aurora responded to various conversational approaches. Instead, he was standing by the window with his arms folded, watching Aurora laugh at something Finian said about the timber negotiations. She was laughing with her whole face. The professional mask was off. She looked relaxed and warm and beautiful, and she was directing all of that warmth at Finian, and something inside Zev's chest, something large and possessive and entirely unreasonable, did not like it. Threat assessment, his wolf reported, suddenly alert. Male subject is in close proximity to mate. Subject is making her laugh. Recommend intervention. Possible approaches. Direct challenge, territorial display, or casual insertion of dominance via superior commentary on the timber industry. Zev, are you taking notes? Aurora called. Yes, he lied. He had not taken a single note. He had been calculating the exact distance between Finian's hand and Aurora's on the table. Finian, who had survived years of Zev's moods, caught the look in the king's eye and quietly moved his chair 6 inches further from Aurora. Perhaps we should wrap up this exercise, he said brightly. I think the lesson has been very instructive. We've been going for 4 minutes, Aurora said. 4 very educational minutes, Finian said, standing. I have learned so much. Excuse me. He retreated with the strategic speed of a man who recognized a territorial situation developing and valued his limbs. Zev watched him go and said nothing. Aurora looked at the king, at his rigid posture and the muscle ticking in his jaw, and understood, with a cold clarity, exactly what had just happened. He was jealous. Of Finian. During a practice exercise. The margin. The author has just observed a possessive response from the Alpha King, triggered by a 4-minute conversation with his own beta. The author's heart rate has increased. The author tells herself this is alarm. The margin notes that alarm does not typically present with flushed cheeks and a suppressed smile. This was the beginning of the end. Lesson 11, she shortened to 30 minutes. No explanation given. He did not ask for one. Lesson 12, she sent a substitute, a young beta named Philip who specialized in deportment and had a very soothing voice. Zev sat through 18 minutes of Philip's instruction on the proper way to offer one's arm, then politely told Philip that his services were not required and that he would wait for Miss Casey. Philip reported back to Aurora that the king had been extremely courteous and absolutely terrifying, and that he would prefer not to return. Lesson 13 was cancelled due to a research emergency concerning the historical use of fish forks in the Western Pax. Lesson 14 was postponed because of a sudden curriculum conflict, which apparently meant reorganizing her binder tabs. There was no Lesson 15. Aurora Casey started avoiding him. Not just the lessons. him. She took different corridors. She ate meals at irregular hours. She developed a sudden, passionate interest in the library's most remote and inaccessible wing, the one that housed agricultural reform texts and smelled of dust and despair. If she saw him coming, she turned. If she heard his voice, she found a door. Finian Holt, who had been delivering her cancellation excuses with the weary expression of a man forced to lie for a living, finally ran out of plausible cover stories. She has, according to this morning's memo, he told Zev, developed a sudden and pressing need to alphabetize the entire Royal Library's collection on agricultural reform. By hand. This is after the fish fork emergency and the binder reorganization and the Philip incident. I am running out of ways to make this sound reasonable. The Margin had opinions about all of it, and had been annotating Aurora's choices with increasing exasperation. On the Agricultural Reform Library. The author is now alphabetizing books she has no intention of reading, in a room she chose specifically because it is on the opposite side of the castle from the king's study. This is not professional development. This is geography as therapy. On the alternate corridors. The author added 11 minutes to her commute today to avoid walking past the armory. The Margin notes that the author does not even know if the king was in the armory. The author was not willing to risk finding out. This is no longer avoidance. This is cartography. Aurora ignored all of this. She was extremely skilled at ignoring the Margin. She had been practicing since she was 15. Zev was not a man skilled in social nuance, but he was the Alpha King. He noticed patterns. He noticed the way Aurora now stood on the opposite side of any room, using tables and chairs as defensive fortifications. He noticed how her gaze skittered away from his the moment he met it. And he noticed the smaller things. The way the castle seemed to swallow her. How the footman who held the study door each morning would nod to Zev, bow to Finian, and simply look through Aurora as if she were a piece of furniture that had wandered into the wrong room. How the head steward, Marcus, had stopped Aurora in the corridor last week to ask Finian, who was standing 3 feet behind her, when the king's little helper would be done cluttering up the schedule with her lessons. Aurora had smiled politely, sidestepped, and continued walking. She hadn't reacted. She hadn't protested. She had absorbed it with the practiced ease of a woman who had been looked through her entire life. What Zev didn't see was what happened next. Around the corner, out of sight, Aurora had stopped. She had pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger, a small, private pain to anchor herself. The king's little helper. Of course. Of course that's what she was. She had always been the little helper, the invisible hand, the woman who polished other people until they shone, and then stepped back into the shadow where she belonged. She had built an entire career on being useful, precisely because useful was the closest she had ever come to being valued. The Margin, for once, did not correct her. It did not flag the thought for review or add a cross-reference to a healthier self-concept. Because even the Margin did not know what to write when the author believed something this deeply. Some wounds were older than the wolf. Some wounds were the foundation the whole manuscript was built on. She had walked home that day without stopping at the library. She had not reorganized anything. She had sat in her apartment and been very, very still. It was, Zev realized from his side of the wall, not a single wound. It was a callus, built up over years of being treated as a service provider, a tool, a means to an end. She was the woman behind the curtain, and she had long ago stopped expecting anyone to notice the curtain was there. It bothered him. It bothered him in a way he couldn't articulate, like an itch in a place he couldn't reach. His wolf, predictably, was less nuanced about it. Subject is engaging in evasive maneuvers. Analysis, she is afraid. Query, of us or of the bond? Secondary observation, the steward who addressed her as the king's little helper should be reassigned to latrine maintenance. Zev stood by the massive window of his study, looking out over the training grounds where young wolves sparred in the morning mist. He wasn't watching them. He was thinking about the scent of old books and rain. He was thinking about the precise shade of brown in her eyes when she was exasperated with him, which was most of the time. "She is avoiding me," he said to Finian, who was attempting to sort through a mountain of official correspondence. "Yes, Zev, she is. She has been for 11 days. I have been delivering her excuses. I am tired of delivering her excuses. The fish fork one was beneath both of us." "Why?" Finian finally looked up with eyes that held the accumulated weariness of 1,000 royal blunders. "Because you are a terrifyingly effective student, Zev, and Aurora Casey is a professional who has just discovered her star pupil is about to accidentally set fire to the classroom. With her in it." Zev processed this. It was a metaphor. He was getting better at metaphors. The fire was the inconvenient, uncontractual feeling growing between them. "The goal was for me to improve." "The goal was for you to improve enough to secure a politically advantageous mate at the Grand Prospect Gala next month," Finian corrected gently. "The goal was not for you to turn your full, undivided, high-beam headlight attention onto your etiquette tutor and make her question every life choice she has ever made." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I tried to warn the council. Teaching someone to be charming is dangerous enough. Teaching someone to be charming when they have the emotional focus of a missile guidance system is a recipe for collateral damage." "She is not collateral damage," Zev said quietly, and there was something in his voice, a low current of protective intensity, that made Finian look up sharply. "No," Finian agreed, his voice careful. "She isn't. Which is exactly the problem, isn't it?" Zev did not answer. He did not need to. Zev turned from the window. He had a singular focus when he wanted something. It was what made him a good king and a terrible dinner party guest. And right now, he wanted an answer. From her. He swept out of the room, his long strides eating up the hallway carpet. Finian just dropped his head into his hands. Aurora was in the library, a place that was her personal sanctuary. It was quiet, smelled of history, and the people in the books never said things like adequate. She was perched on a rolling ladder, pretending to be deeply absorbed in a dusty tome titled Crop Rotation in the Sunstone Delta, a study in fallow field management. It was, objectively, the least romantic book in the entire castle. She had chosen it deliberately. If she was going to hide, she was going to hide behind something with absolutely zero emotional content. Turnip yields could not hurt her. Fallow field management did not have silver eyes. She had been hiding for 11 minutes and had absorbed precisely nothing. Every time she tried to focus on the text, her brain unhelpfully supplied a memory instead. The way his voice had resonated through her bones when he said beautiful. The way his presence felt not like pressure, but like warmth, like standing near a fire on a cold night and realizing you had been shivering for so long you'd forgotten what warm felt like. The margin. The author has read the same paragraph about nitrogen depletion 4 times. Retention rate? 0. Reason. The author is thinking about his forearms. This is not in the curriculum. The drawer the author keeps her feelings in has been open since he said beautiful. The author has been pretending it is closed. The margin has noted this discrepancy in every draft since. The library doors opened with a soft thud that echoed in the vast, silent space. She didn't have to look. She could feel his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. The air grew heavier, warmer. Every nerve ending she possessed went on high alert. She did not turn. She focused on the turnips. The turnips, at least, had never looked at her like she was the only thing in the room. "Miss Casey." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of command. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice tight, her eyes fixed on the book. "I was just conducting some essential research for our next lesson, on the importance of agricultural small talk. Turnips are a surprisingly divisive topic in the northern packs." He was at the base of the ladder now. She could smell the crisp scent of the forest clinging to his clothes, a hint of leather and pure, undiluted alpha. It was distracting. Dangerously so. The margin, addendum to previous note. It is not just the forearms. It is the entire situation. Recommend immediate evacuation. Also, the author's grip on the ladder has tightened. This has been noted. We need to talk. Is it about the turnips? Because I have several theories. The Graymore delegation, for instance, has very strong opinions on root vegetables. If you lead with a nuanced take on soil acidity at the gala, you could have them eating out of your hand. It is not about the turnips. He reached up and took the book from her hands. His fingers brushed hers, and a jolt, sharp and unwelcome, shot up her arm. He closed the book with a definitive snap. Why are you avoiding me? There it was, the blunt, inescapable question. She could lie. She could invent another dozen curriculum emergencies. She had a good one prepared about the etiquette of napkin folding in the Southern Territories that could have bought her at least a week. But looking down into those sincere, searching silver eyes, the lie died in her throat. He deserved the truth, even if the truth was professionally ruinous. She descended the ladder, her movements stiff. She faced him, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. Because you're improving, she said, the words coming out in a rush. He blinked, genuinely thrown. Isn't that good? No! Yes! It's terrible! She threw her hands up in exasperation. It's my job to make you improve. I should be thrilled. I should be demanding a bonus from the council. Her voice dropped, becoming quiet and raw. But I'm not. Because I find myself, against all logic and professional ethics, wanting you to fail. He was very still, processing her words not as an insult, but as a piece of data he didn't understand. His wolf, however, understood perfectly. Confirmation. The subject has acknowledged the mutual nature of the bond. Protocol dictates Phase 2 may now commence. Fail with them, Zev said, his voice a low murmur. He took a small step closer, invading her carefully maintained personal space. Or fail with you? Aurora's breath caught. The distinction was critical. That's not. The goal is for you to succeed with an appropriate mate. The author is aware that she did not answer the question. The margin is also aware. The evasion has been logged. What if I only want to pass with one person? He asked, his gaze unwavering. He was closer now, so close she could see the flecks of darker gray in his irises, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow that she had never noticed before. That defeats the entire purpose of my employment, she whispered, her resolve crumbling. He tilted his head, a gesture she'd seen him use when considering a complex political maneuver. But there was no coldness in it now, only a quiet, devastating intensity. Does it? That was it. That was the moment the last of her professional armor disintegrated. He wasn't just learning the lines she gave him, he was rewriting the entire play. And he was casting her in the lead role. She couldn't do this. She couldn't be the tool that fixed him for someone else. Not when he looked at her like that. Not when her chest ached with the effort of pretending she didn't want to close the remaining distance between them. She was the hired help, the consultant, the woman behind the curtain. She didn't get to be on stage. That wasn't how this story went. Not for someone like her. The margin. The author is about to make a decision she will regret. The margin formally objects. The margin notes that someone like her is an undefined term that the author has never once examined honestly. The margin requests for the 27th time that the author revise this section of her self-concept. Request denied, as always. Noted with disappointment. She took a step back, putting distance between them. It felt like tearing something. I resign, she said, the words tasting like ash. I'll submit the official paperwork in the morning. The council can find you another tutor, someone sturdier. someone who wasn't currently melting into a puddle of unprofessional feelings on the library floor. She turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight, every inch the consummate professional making a tactical retreat. She didn't see the look on his face as she left, a look of quiet, unshakable determination. King Zev Wildblood had never failed at anything he truly wanted. And he was just beginning to understand what that was. The resignation paperwork sat on Zev's desk for 3 days, a crisp white declaration of surrender that he refused to acknowledge. He did not sign it. He did not forward it to the council. He used it as a coaster for his morning tea, leaving a faint circular stain on Aurora's perfect calligraphy. It was the pettiest thing he had done all year, and it brought him a disproportionate amount of satisfaction. On the second day, he accidentally dripped honey on it. He did not clean it up. On the third day, he read it again, focusing on her handwriting. It was precise, elegant, and slightly angry. The loops on her G's were tight with suppressed emotion. The signature at the bottom was a sharp, decisive slash, the penmanship equivalent of a door slamming. He found it beautiful. This was, he recognized, a problem. Strategic delay is an effective tactic, his wolf noted approvingly. However, a more proactive approach is recommended. The subject is fortifying her position. She has been observed color-coding her sock drawer. This is a sign of extreme emotional distress. Additional intelligence. She has canceled her subscription to the Royal Herald and returned 3 library books early. These are the actions of someone preparing to disappear. The wolf paused. We do not permit this. For once, Zev was in complete agreement. On the third night, after the castle had gone quiet, Zev went to the armory. Not to organize. Everything was already in its place. There was nothing left to arrange, nothing left to straighten or sort or impose order on. He stood among the weapons and the silence, and found that he had run out of things to fix. He sat on the floor. The king of all werewolves, sitting on cold stone in the dark, surrounded by instruments of war that could not help him. His wolf was quiet. Not the tactical silence of a predator waiting for the right moment, just quiet, the way a companion goes quiet when there is nothing useful left to say. Zev had never been refused, not in any way that mattered. He had taken territories, won challenges, commanded armies. He had bent the world to his will through force and focus, and the simple, brutal certainty that he was right. But Aurora had not refused him out of weakness or strategy. She had refused him because she believed, in the deepest part of herself, that she was not meant to be chosen. And he could not conquer that. He could not challenge it to a duel. He could not organize it into submission. He was terrified. Not that she had said no, but that she might be right to. That he might not be capable of being what she needed. That a man who expressed love through linen closet optimization might not be enough for a woman whose heart had been treated as invisible for so long she had started to believe it was. His wolf stirred, finally, not with a tactical report, just with a question asked in Zev's own voice. What if we are not enough? He sat with that question for a long time, and then he stood up, because he was the Alpha King, and the Alpha King did not accept unanswered questions. He would find the answer. He would find it from her. Finian, meanwhile, was having a terrible time. He had cornered Zev in the armory, where the king was stress-organizing the pikes by length and sharpness, a habit that had cost him 2 stewards who had made the mistake of trying to help. Zev, you have to sign the papers. The council is having a collective aneurysm. Lord Rupert Thorne is sharpening his monologues. He delivered a 17-minute speech this morning about maintaining the dignity of the selection process that was so boring 3 council members fell asleep. One of them was standing up. He paused for breath. And I am trying to negotiate a timber treaty with Alpha Sabine of the Iron Ridge Pack using your pre-Aurora methods. Do you know what she said when I complimented her on her efficient deployment of logging resources? Zev placed a pike in its rack with geometric precision. That it was an accurate assessment? She asked if I was a tax auditor or a suitor. When I clarified I was attempting to be charming, she laughed for 3 straight minutes, called me adorably bureaucratic, and threatened to make a coat out of me. And the worst part is, I think she meant it as a compliment. I don't know how to interpret anything anymore. We need Aurora back. I am aware, Zev said calmly. He picked up a battle axe, tested its weight, and set it down at a slightly different angle. I have a plan. Finian looked alarmed. Your plans usually involve challenging someone to a duel or invading a small, unsuspecting territory. Please tell me this one involves less paperwork for me. It involves one final lesson, Zev said, a glint in his eye that Finian did not like at all. Oh no, Finian said quietly. One final lesson, Zev repeated, as if Finian's dread was ambient noise he could safely ignore. He placed the last axe in its bracket, stood back, and surveyed the armory with the satisfaction of a man who had imposed order on a chaotic universe. From her curriculum, she designed it. She cannot object to completing it. She can object to many things, Zev. She is extremely skilled at objecting. She once objected to the font on a seating chart for 14 minutes. Module 7, Zev continued undeterred. The Grand Gesture. Section 4B, the Marriage Proposal. Finian opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then sat down on a weapons crate with the resigned air of a man watching a controlled demolition that was about to become uncontrolled. You're going to ask your etiquette tutor to teach you how to propose, and then you're going to propose, to her, using the lesson she is teaching you. That is correct. That is either the most romantic thing I have ever heard or the most unhinged. I genuinely cannot tell. Both, probably, Zev conceded, then quieter. She needs to see that it's real, Finian. She thinks she's a tool, something to be used and set aside. I need to show her she is not. But if I simply declare my intentions, she will assume it is confusion or gratitude or some misplaced alpha fixation. She will rationalize it away. She is extremely good at rationalizing. So you're going to use her own system against her. I'm going to use her own system to speak her language. There is a difference. Finian considered this for a long moment. Then he sighed, stood, and brushed dust off his trousers. I'll have the car ready. Aurora was packing. Her small apartment, usually a haven of minimalist order, was in a state of controlled chaos. Boxes labeled etiquette manuals and historical cutlery were stacked against one wall. Her entire professional library was sorted, categorized, and ready for transport. It was a physical manifestation of her decision to flee. Everything had a label. Everything had a place. If her emotional life was a disaster, at least her filing system would survive. She sat on the floor between two boxes, holding a leather-bound copy of Pemberton's Guide to Formal Address, 7th edition. It had been her grandmother's. The spine was cracked, the pages soft with use, and in the margins, in faded red ink, were her grandmother's annotations. Corrections, clarifications, small, fierce notes that said, "This matters, get it right." Aurora ran her thumb over one of them and felt her throat tighten. Her grandmother had taught her that words were power, that knowing the right thing to say and when to say it could open doors that birth and status had locked. And now she was using that power to run away from the one person who had ever looked at her, truly looked at her, and said the word beautiful like it was the most obvious fact in the world. The margin. The author is holding her grandmother's book while sitting on the floor of a half-dismantled apartment. The author is about to cry. The author would like the record to show that she is not crying. The margin would like the record to show that she is. She pressed the book against her chest and allowed herself, for one unguarded moment, to feel the full weight of what she was leaving behind. Not the job, not the castle, not the money. Him. The man who organized pikes when he was stressed, the man who complimented posture instead of appearance because he genuinely valued discipline over decoration. The man who had looked at her with those silver eyes and asked, "Does it?" as if the answer was the only thing in the world that mattered. She was doing the right thing. He was a king. She was a contractor. This was how the story went. The margin. The author has written this sentence before. Draft 4, Draft 5, Draft 6, each time with less conviction. The margin notes that "this is how the story went" is not a fact. It is a choice disguised as an inevitability. The author knows this. She does not wish to examine it. Noted. She didn't believe it, but she was very good at pretending. A knock on her door made her jump. It was a heavy, authoritative knock. Not the mail carrier. Not the nosy neighbor from 3B who kept asking if she could sense auras. She knew who it was before she even opened the door. King Zev Wildblood stood on her doorstep, looking entirely too large and out of place in the mundane hallway of her apartment building. He wasn't wearing his royal finery, just simple black trousers and a gray shirt that stretched across his broad chest in a way that was frankly inconsiderate. He held a single, crisp piece of paper. Her resignation. The tea stain was clearly visible, a perfect ring of Earl Grey on what had been her finest calligraphy. The margin. He came. The margin would like the author to note that the king of all werewolves is standing in her hallway holding a document she wrote, and he appears to have used it as a coaster. This is simultaneously the most disrespectful and the most endearing thing anyone has ever done to the author's calligraphy. "You have a tea stain on my formal withdrawal of services," she said, her voice tight. "I do," he agreed without a hint of apology. "I have not accepted it. Your contract is not concluded." "I believe it is. I taught you everything I could." "Not everything." His gaze was serious. "There is one final lesson you outlined in your curriculum. Module 7, the grand gesture. Specifically, Section 4B, the marriage proposal." Aurora's blood ran cold. "That was a theoretical module, Your Majesty, for advanced students. You are not an advanced student." "My compliments have progressed from structurally sound to pleasingly symmetrical in less than a month. I held a 5-minute conversation with the Duchess of Stonefall about her prize-winning roses without once mentioning blight. By your own metrics, I qualify." "Those metrics are guidelines, not binding criteria." He stepped past her into the apartment. He did it with the calm authority of a man who was accustomed to entering rooms without waiting for permission, which, to be fair, he was. He surveyed the boxes, his expression unreadable. "You are leaving." "I am relocating," she corrected, closing the door because having the king of all werewolves standing in her hallway was the kind of thing that would give Mrs. Kapoor in 3B enough gossip fuel to last a decade. "For professional reasons." "This is a professional matter," he insisted, turning to face her. "I must be prepared for the gala. I need to know how to do this correctly. This is the most important lesson. You cannot abandon my education at the final, critical stage. It would be unprofessional." He was using her own logic against her, wielding the word unprofessional like a weapon he knew she had no defense against. She felt the trap closing. Her wound, the deep-seated belief that she was a service to be used and set aside, ached with a familiar sharpness. He wanted one last use of the tool before returning it to the drawer. Fine. She would give him his final lesson. She would show him how to propose to his perfect, high-born queen, and then she would disappear. She would be invisible again, which was where she belonged. The margin. The margin has read this draft before. The margin is tired. "Fine," she snapped, her control fraying. "One last lesson. What do you want to know? The proper kneeling posture? The traditional wording? The appropriate carat weight for a royal engagement ring?" "All of it," he said quietly. "Show me. Demonstrate." She took a deep breath, shifting into instructor mode. It was her armor. When she was teaching, she was useful, and useful was safe. The proposal is not a request. It is a declaration. It must be sincere, personal, and unwavering. You begin by creating a moment of intimacy. You eliminate all distractions. He was already doing that, his sheer presence sucking all the air and attention in the room toward him like a gravitational field. You then articulate what the person means to you. You must be specific. Generalities are for treaties, not for mates. Anyone can say, "You are wonderful." A proposal must say why. It must be evidence of attention. He nodded, listening with an unnerving focus. Specifics. Go on. You reference a shared memory, something that is unique to the two of you. It shows you have been paying attention. It tells them they are not interchangeable, not a placeholder, not a role to be filled. Her voice caught slightly on the word placeholder, but she pushed through. Then you state your intention clearly, and you kneel. It is a gesture of surrendering your strength, of placing your power at their feet. It is the ultimate act of alpha vulnerability. "I see," he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked at her, and the playful glint was gone, replaced by a terrifying sincerity. "Like this?" And then, in the middle of her half-packed, ridiculously small living room, King Zev Wildblood went down on one knee. The floorboards creaked in protest. The sight was so incongruous, so utterly world-altering, that for a moment Aurora forgot how to breathe. The king of all werewolves was kneeling to her. To an etiquette coach, amongst boxes of forks. "Your Majesty, what are you doing? This is the demonstration part. I demonstrate, you observe." "I am practicing," he said, his silver eyes locked on hers. He reached out, not to touch her, but to take her hand. His grasp was warm and firm. And then his wolf went quiet. For the first time since the lessons began, there was no tactical commentary, no protocol check, no risk assessment. The constant military briefing narration that ran through Zev's mind like a ticker tape simply stopped. The silence was deafening. And in that silence there was only Zev, on one knee on a creaking floor, holding the hand of a woman who could say no. He was, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, completely and utterly terrified. He took a breath. "You said to be specific." "Your Majesty, I really don't think—" Aurora Casey. Her name in his mouth was not a title or a formality. It was an anchor. "From our first meeting, you have been a catastrophic failure of my entire defense system. You have challenged me, you have exasperated me, and you have refused to be intimidated by me. You look at me not as a crown, but as a project, a deeply flawed, socially inept project, and it is the most honest anyone has been with me in my entire adult life." Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. This was not the lesson plan. This was a complete and total deviation. The margin had gone very still. For the first time in Aurora's memory, it was not annotating. It was listening. "You said to reference a shared memory," he continued, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. "The first time I saw you, I called your eyes adequate. It was the most inaccurate statement I have ever made. They are not adequate. They are the color of rich earth after a rainstorm, and they see right through every wall I build around myself. I have thought of little else since. It is inconvenient. It is disruptive. It has severely impacted my ability to focus on trade negotiations. I do not care." His thumb traced a slow circle on the back of her hand. "I am not a poet. I cannot offer you pretty words. I will always be better at organizing armories than expressing emotion. But I can offer you honesty. I can offer you loyalty. I can offer you a lifetime of me trying, and probably failing, to say the right thing." He paused, and she saw it then, the vulnerability beneath the power, the man beneath the king. His jaw was tight, his silver eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously close to fear. "My wolf recognized you from the moment you walked into my study. It has taken my human brain considerably longer to catch up. But I am here now." Something stirred in him, a quiet, instinctive pull toward the place where her neck met her shoulder. the place where a mark would bind them. He did not act on it, but his wolf registered the impulse with a single, reverent word. Soon. The lessons were never for them, Zev said, his voice quiet but unshakable. They were always for you. I was just too stupid to realize I was practicing for the only test that mattered. He paused, and the silence in the room was absolute. Even the pipes in the wall, which usually provided a constant background symphony of complaint, had gone quiet. That wasn't practice, he said. Aurora stared at him, at the king kneeling at her feet, offering her not a crown, but his awkward, honest, infuriating self. She looked at his sincere, hopeful face. She looked at the tea-stained resignation letter on her kitchen counter. She looked at the boxes of her carefully packed, carefully ordered, carefully invisible life. He wasn't practicing. He was proposing. And the margin, in the quietest voice Aurora had ever heard from it, wrote a single, final annotation on the draft of her life she had been writing since she was 12 years old. The draft that said she was invisible, that she was a tool, that she was the woman behind the curtain who never got to step into the light. This document is no longer under editorial review. All corrections have been accepted. Final draft approved. And she, in the biggest, most spectacular failure of her professional career, knew exactly what her answer was. The word yes was a whisper, so quiet she wasn't sure she'd said it aloud. But he heard it. Of course he heard it. He was a wolf. For a moment, neither of them moved. The word hung in the air between them, small and enormous at the same time. A single syllable that rearranged the entire architecture of both their lives. Aurora watched it land on him, watched the way his silver eyes widened fractionally, the way the tension in his shoulders released like a held breath, the way his hand tightened around hers, as if he was afraid she might take it back. She wasn't going to take it back. That was the terrifying part. She had never been more certain of anything in her life, and certainty, for a woman who had built her entire identity on careful, measured, reversible decisions, was the most frightening thing in the world. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Zev's face, transforming his usually stern features into something boyishly handsome. It was a genuine, unguarded smile, and it was aimed directly at her. It was devastating. She had spent weeks trying to teach him how to smile like that, and now she realized he had always known how. He had just never had a reason. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, pulling her gently with him. He didn't kiss her. Instead, he did something far more intimate. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. Good, he murmured, the word a low vibration against her skin. The logistics of canceling the gala would have been complex. Aurora let out a shaky laugh that was half a sob. Of course. Even in the most romantic moment of her life, he was thinking about logistics. You are infuriating. I have been told you have your work cut out for you. His wolf, from the depths of its unprecedented silence, finally spoke. Phase 3, Consolidation of Gains. Mate secured. Recommend immediate bonding run and consumption of celebratory meats. Some things never changed. The return to the castle was a blur. One moment, Aurora was standing in her dismantled life. The next, she was sitting in the king's ridiculously opulent car, her hand still held firmly in his. He hadn't let go. Outside in the hallway, Zev's royal guard, a pair of enormous wolves who had been left standing bewildered by the elevator for the better part of an hour, reported back to Finian via a terse radio message that the king had entered a commoner's apartment building alone, emerged holding an Omega's hand, and smiled. Finian, back at the castle, poured himself a large drink and did not ask follow-up questions. In the car, Aurora felt a dawning sense of panic mixed with a dizzying, terrifying joy. What had she done? She, Aurora Casey, the queen of control and order, had just agreed to marry the most chaotic variable on the continent. She wasn't meant for this. She wasn't a queen. She was the woman who taught queens which fork to use. "You're spiraling," he said, not looking at her. "I'm not spiraling. I'm conducting a rational assessment of the catastrophic life decision I just made." "That's spiraling with a filing system." She let out a startled laugh despite herself. He was getting genuinely funny. That was possibly the most alarming development of all. The margin. The author would like to state, for the record, that she is terrified. The margin would like to state, also for the record, that she is smiling. Both things are true. Both things are allowed to be true. This is a new editorial policy. "The council is going to lose their collective minds," she said, staring out the window without seeing anything. Lord Rupert Thorne specifically. Zev's expression hardened at the name. "Thorne will be handled. He told me, at the gala rehearsal, that I was a good tool." Those were his exact words. The memory sent a fresh pang of humiliation through her. The casual, dismissive cruelty of it. She had been arranging place cards, and Rupert had stopped beside her, looked at her work, and smiled the thin, satisfied smile of a man inspecting a piece of equipment. "A good tool knows when its work is done, Miss Casey," he had said. "I do hope we can count on your discretion when this little project concludes." He hadn't waited for her response. He had simply walked away, as if she were a lamp he had switched off. "He was wrong," Zev said, his voice flat and cold in a way that suggested Lord Rupert Thorne's comfortable existence was about to become significantly less comfortable. "And I will enjoy correcting him." The council was, in fact, already assembled when they arrived. They had been summoned for an emergency session regarding the king's unprecedented and alarming refusal to engage with prospective mates. They were gathered in the throne room, a cavernous space dominated by the brooding presence of the blood oak throne at its center. Aurora's stomach lurched at the sight of it. Greta's story about Queen Iselda echoed in her mind, the throne groaning in rejection. She pushed the thought down. The margin did not push it down. The margin. See Appendix C. The throne rejected a queen with no true bond. Query for the author. Do you have a true bond? The margin knows the answer. The author knows the answer. The throne, presumably, will also know the answer. The air was thick with anxiety and expensive cologne. Lord Rupert Thorne stood at the forefront, his posture radiating smug authority. He was a man who had spent decades accumulating influence through careful positioning and strategic condescension. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been designed to peer down a long nose at things, and he used it with enthusiasm. The great doors of the throne room swung open, and all conversation ceased. Zev strode in, his alpha presence washing over the room like a physical force, demanding silence and attention. And at his side, her hand still held in his, was Aurora. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled lords and ladies. They looked from the king to the etiquette coach, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright horror. Someone dropped a goblet. It rang out against the stone floor like a small, scandalized bell. Rupert stepped forward, his face a mask of patronizing concern. "Your Majesty, we were just discussing the final preparations for the gala. Perhaps your consultant could wait outside?" He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, not even deigning to look at her. It was the same gesture he had used before, the gesture that said, "You are furniture." But this time, Zev was there. He stepped slightly in front of Aurora, a subtle, protective gesture that did not go unnoticed. "Miss Casey is not a consultant, and she will not be waiting outside. She is my intended mate." The silence that followed was so profound Aurora could hear the frantic beat of her own heart, the creak of old wood, and what might have been Lord Pembroke in the back row quietly choking on a pastry. Rupert's mask of concern dropped, revealing the cold arrogance beneath. He turned to the council, not even addressing Aurora directly, and spread his hands in a gesture of theatrical bewilderment. "We must be patient with His Majesty," he said, his voice dripping with silk-wrapped condescension. "Even a king can confuse gratitude for affection when the help is accommodating." He let the word accommodating hang in the air, weighted with implication. A few uncomfortable titters rose from the back of the room. The girl is a hired contractor, a commoner. She was engaged to polish the king's manners for a true queen, not to claim the throne herself. The wild bloodline requires strength, requires standing. This is not a matter of personal fancy. It is a matter of our pack's legacy and survival. A murmur of agreement went through the more conservative members of the council. Aurora felt herself shrink. This was what she had feared. They saw her exactly as she had always seen herself, a service, a tool, a placeholder that had overstepped. She could feel the old familiar weight settling on her shoulders, the gravity of a lifetime of being looked through, and she hated how easily it fit. The margin, quiet until now, stirred. It did not annotate with its usual dry precision. For the first time, it wrote in something that felt less like editorial correction and more like defiance. The margin. The author is not a placeholder. The author has never been a placeholder. The margin has been writing this correction for 26 years, and the author has never once accepted the edit. Accept the edit. But Rupert wasn't finished. He was a man who never used one word when 12 more cutting ones were available. The blood oak itself will not accept such a dilution of the wild blood line, he declared, gesturing toward the throne with the dramatic flourish of a man who had rehearsed this in a mirror. The throne has judged consorts for centuries. It rejected Queen Iselda. It will reject this woman, and it will diminish the crown for choosing her. This was his trump card, the ancient magic of the throne, a power no one dared question. All eyes turned to the massive, gnarled chair. It seemed to loom larger, darker, a silent judge in the center of the room. Zev looked at Aurora. He saw the fear in her eyes, the flicker of the old wound that told her she didn't belong. He saw the woman who had faced him down with nothing but her wits and a spine of steel, now wavering under the weight of centuries of aristocratic snobbery. And he made a choice. He released her hand, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was letting her go. Instead, he turned to face her fully, in front of the entire stunned council. He brought 2 fingers to his own heart, held them there for a beat, and then extended them toward her. The room went absolutely still. It was a gesture from the old traditions, so ancient it was almost forgotten. Aurora knew it, of course, because she had studied every obscure protocol in every dusty book in every library she had ever entered. It was the salute of the first Alpha to the first Omega in the founding legends. It was not a gesture for a subordinate, or a contractor, or a tool. It was a declaration that, in his eyes, she was his equal, his queen. Several of the older council members had tears in their eyes. Lord Pembroke had stopped choking and was now openly weeping into his pastry. Then Zev turned to Rupert, his silver eyes blazing with cold fury. "The throne will accept whom I choose, and you, Rupert, will address your future queen with the respect she is due." He paused. "Or you will be addressing me from a cell. I hear the one beneath the East Tower has excellent ventilation." He offered his arm to Aurora. Her hand was trembling as she took it. He led her toward the dais, toward the imposing blood oak throne. The council watched, holding its collective breath. Rupert watched with a smug, certain smirk. He had staked everything on the ancient magic aligning with his snobbery. Zev sat first, the throne accepting his weight without a sound. He did not release Aurora's arm. He tugged her gently, inviting her to sit on the wide armrest beside him, a position of informal intimacy no queen had ever dared to take in this formal setting. She sat, her hip pressed against his, a part of him. The throne did nothing. There was no flash of light, no rumble of discontent. The ancient, semi-sentient wood remained silent, its grain warm beneath her touch. If anything, it seemed to settle, to exhale, as if a long empty space had finally been filled. A low groan of despair escaped Rupert Thorne. His entire argument, his whole power play, had crumbled into dust. His arrogance had not allowed for the possibility that the magic of the bond was stronger than the magic of pedigree. The throne did not judge bloodlines or social standing. It judged the truth of the bond. And the bond between Zev and Aurora was, apparently, true enough to make ancient wood purr. Zev looked out over his stunned council, his arm now resting protectively around Aurora's waist. "The Grand Prospect Gala will proceed as planned," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Not as a courtship event, but as the formal introduction of my queen." He let that settle. "Are there any other objections?" There were not. Aurora leaned slightly into him and murmured, just low enough for only him to hear, "You could have warned me about the throne gambit." "I didn't plan it," he murmured back. "I was going to argue constitutional law." "That would have been terrible." "I know. The throne was much more efficient." She almost laughed. She was sitting on the blood oak throne, in the arms of the Alpha King, in front of a council that had expected her to be dismissed like a spent candle. And she was almost laughing. Something in her chest, something old and tight and heavy, loosened a fraction. It did not disappear, but it shifted, like a door opening onto a room she hadn't known existed. The margin, very quietly, closed a file it had kept open for 26 years and began a new one. The epilogue of their story was not a neat, tidy ending. It was, much like their courtship, a chaotic and ongoing state of affairs. Aurora did not magically transform into a demure, graceful queen overnight. She was still Aurora, sharp, organized, and prone to sarcastic internal commentary, both her own and the editorial variety. Her official title became Queen Consort, but the pack soon gave her another, unofficial one, the King's Tactician. She became his most trusted advisor, her skill with words and diplomacy balancing his blunt force. She found, to her astonishment, that her voice was heard, that she was seen. At her first official reception, the head steward Marcus, the same man who had once called her the King's little helper, approached her with a silver tray and addressed her as Your Majesty. She looked him in the eye, said, "Thank you, Marcus," and did not gloat. She did not need to. She was no longer invisible. The margin. No annotation required. The record speaks for itself. Some mornings, she still woke up expecting the dream to end, but then Zev would grunt something from beside her that translated roughly to, "The planting reports need your review," and she would know, with quiet certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Zev did not become a smooth-talking romantic. He remained Zev, awkward, literal, and prone to expressing his love through logistical support. For their first anniversary, he presented her with a detailed, multi-volume plan for optimizing the castle's linen closets. She found it more touching than any poem. "Your strategic analysis of the trade dispute was formidably precise," he would murmur, and she would know he was saying, "I love you." Their wedding was a beautiful, chaotic disaster. Zev knocked over a 7-tiered cake with an elbow. Finian, serving as best man, delivered a toast that was mostly a thinly veiled therapy session. "She taught Zev Wildblood how to say something nice," he said, raising his glass. "I don't know if that makes her a miracle worker or clinically insane. But either way, we owe her." And the royal howl of proclamation was a moment of pure comedy. Zev's howl was as enthusiastically tone-deaf as ever. Aurora, standing beside him under the full moon, was supposed to add her voice to his in harmonious unity. Instead, she laughed so hard she could barely make a sound. Her howl came out as a breathless, hiccuping wheeze. Zev, hearing her, grinned, and his howl wobbled spectacularly off-key. The pack laughed too. It was not a perfect howl, but it was a happy one. Lord Rupert Thorne was quietly retired to his country estate. Finian eventually secured his timber treaty with Alpha Sabine after he snapped, bluntly told her that her terms were outrageous. And she grinned, signed the paper, and invited him to dinner. One evening, months after the wedding, Aurora found Zev in the armory. He was polishing a helmet with ferocious intensity. It was his old habit, the stress organizing. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his broad back. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. He sighed, the tension leaving his shoulders at her touch. "The spring planting reports are a mess, and I have a meeting with the Riverbend Alpha tomorrow. He communicates entirely in fishing metaphors. I don't understand him." She smiled into his shirt. "I'll handle the reports, and I'll write you a cheat sheet for the fishing metaphors." She picked up a nearby shield and deliberately set it down at a crooked angle, disrupting the perfect, geometric precision of his arrangement. He turned in her arms, a small smile playing on his lips. "You're messing up my armory." "Yes," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. It was far too organized. It needed a little chaos. His wolf, for once, offered no tactical analysis, no protocol check, no risk assessment. Just a quiet, simple thought that was Zev's as much as his own. Home. And the margin, in the last annotation it would ever need to make, wrote simply, "Final draft. No revisions necessary."